Thanks so much, Shanaz, and good morning, everybody, and hello to everybody out in webcast land. Thank you for taking the time to join in today. I absolutely love presenting to Westpac. Your folks are so switched on. It is just amazing. The buzz in the room, I can actually feel it. So thank you very much for that. We are living in a time right now of absolute massive changes to our society. We have geopolitical events that are unfolding that are unreal. I was a child of the 60s, and I remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, and right now we've got stuff going on in North Korea that reminds me about that, and it's kind of scary. We also have other things that are happening like climate change and some really strange weather patterns. We've got population growth as well, and we've got this massive, massive technological revolution that is happening. And on top of that, we've got this combination of advances in medical technology combined with ICT, where we're on the cusp of possibly living many, many years longer than we do today. All of this is going to radically change the world that we live in. But there seems to be a bit of a disconnect between what many people think is going to happen and what is already starting to happen in the world of technology. Earlier this year, Randstad released a study of Australians, and they thought, 80% of them thought that automation was not going to impact their jobs. That's pretty incredible. It actually was 84%. In the US last year, Pew Research released another study, and in that one, Americans thought that their jobs would be substantially unchanged for the next 50 years. And this was 80%. Yet that's 2/3 of this same group of people thought that automation and robots would impact other people's jobs. So it's like, head in the sand, you know, it's going to happen, but just not to me, right? But in the meantime, we've had these other studies, for instance, from Sept about 2 years ago now, where they were looking at a forecast of up to 40% of Australian jobs going away or being massively disrupted in the next 10 to 15 years, impacting 5 million people. A few months ago at the World Economic Forum, there was a study released where they were predicting that in 15 industrialized nations by 2020, that's only a few years away, that there'd be a job loss of 5 million people due to automation. But it's not all doom and gloom, okay? You know, we've got these forecasts from many, many respected organizations around the world that talk about job loss, but they don't talk about the jobs of the future, the jobs that will be created by technology and by other factors that are happening on a global scale. And you can take a dystopian view of the future, or you can take a view that we can actually shape our future and make it one that we want to live in. And that's my view. So what I'd like to do today is take you on a little bit of a journey through what's happening in technology, how automation is going to impact jobs, and describe some of the new jobs of the future for you. So let's start with cities and how they're going to change. If you can believe it, in 1800, only 3% of the world's population lived in cities. By 2010, 50% of the world's population lives in cities, and it's going up all the time. In 2025, if forecasts are correct, we could have 60% of the population living in cities. And cities only account for 2% of the planet's landmass. It's crazy. We're squishing more and more people into tighter and tighter spaces. And cities are energy hogs too. I was recently looking at some studies that showed that around the world, cities account for between 60 and 80% of a nation's energy use, no matter where you look. And street lighting accounts for about 19% of energy use. You know, there are things that we can do to actually change our environment. But one of the things that's happening with cities becoming denser and denser populated is that buildings are going to go higher and higher. And already in Asia and in the Middle East, there's a bit of a race for the world's tallest buildings. And along with tall buildings comes absolutely fast lifts. The Shanghai World Tower has 127 floors, and it recently won a Guinness World Record for the world's fastest lift. This lift goes at over 74 kilometers per hour. On the way down, they have to slow it down or you'd lose your lunch. So we've got some interesting things happening. We also have companies like ThyssenKrupp that are looking at using magnetic levitation for lifts that go sideways as well as up and down. Our cities are going to change in some interesting ways, and technology is going to be a big part of it. How many of you have heard the term smart cities? Pretty much everybody. And what I'm talking about with smart cities are things like sensors to be able to detect all kinds of traffic patterns in the city, pollution. Here's a great example that's happening in Sydney on the trains, and you may not have heard of it. It's a sensor called Mousetrap. And what this sensor does is it actually sniffs out the odor of graffiti through either spray paint or permanent markers. And when it sniffs out a vandal, it turns on a CCTV camera that gives a feed back to the train office so that they can see what's going on in real time, as well as to the police. And of course, the perps are on a train, and the train has to stop somewhere. So it's actually reducing vandalism and saving a lot of money. There will be sensors as we go into the future that will be able to detect when people are at bus stops or train stations and be able to automatically reroute trains or buses or other transport mechanisms based on where people are. It's just the tip of the iceberg. Imagine in the not too distant future that we have a city with no potholes. This picture was taken about a year ago in Bangalore, India. And it was the result of a burst water main, and it went unfixed for over a month. It was a 12-foot pothole on a major road. You know, that's pretty big, and nobody was fixing it. So a local artist decided to take things into his own hands. He built a mock crocodile and put it in the pothole, painted it like a moat, and the pictures went viral, and the city officials eventually, the next day, came out and finally fixed the pothole. In the future, we may not have to do that. There's a project that is absolutely unreal that is happening in the UK at the University of Leeds in collaboration with a grant from the national government as well as the local council. And they have an idea of building a fleet of tiny little robots that are going to act like the white blood cells of a human body, but for the city. And when they sense defects, they will automatically go out and fix them. So they've got 3 modes that they're working on. One will be flying robots, drones, if you will, that have manipulator arms that are able to do things like change street light bulbs or maybe even someday fix electrical wires. Another thing that they're looking at has to do with roads and potholes, and they have this mode where they're looking at what they call perceive and patch. So the idea is to be able to detect potholes before they become 12 feet big, you know, to where you actually never have to close the street down for roadworks. And I was talking to one of the scientists involved in this project, and I was asking him, how are you going to do this? I was imagining fleets of drones flying above streets and recording things and then little robots coming out and doing the fixing. And he said, no, actually, the way that we're thinking that this will work is we'll collaborate with industry because driverless cars are going to have tons of sensors on them, and they're going to be going time. Let's use the data from the cars to figure out where we've got problems in the making and then send out the little fleets of tiny robots. Now, the robots are still being designed, but one of the concepts are to have tiny little robots that have on board 3D printers that might be 3D printing with asphalt and fixing things in real time. The last mode that they're looking at, which is the most ambitious, is to be able to tiny robots deep into utility pipes under the city. And one of the ideas that they have is to use something called swarm bots. So swarm bots are little tiny robots that can attach and detach themselves and form different shapes. just like the Transformer movies. There are actually whole areas of robotics that are looking at these little swarm bots. Or they might be origami type robots that fold up into different shapes. The team behind this has already designed borehole robots that go deep into utility pipes, and they're the same team that launched an exploration robot that went into the air shafts in the Great Pyramid of Giza and found writing that was unseen by humans for thousands of years. So self-repairing cities may be 10 years away, but it's something that could be on the horizon. Already, we have robots that are working on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. How many of you knew that? Oh, got one. Somebody here is clued in. Meet Sandy and Rosie. This is a collaboration between UTS and New South Wales Roads and Maritime, and they were trying to solve a problem with the Sydney Harbour Bridge in that grit blasting, which is required for bridge maintenance, can be really dangerous to people. And not only that, but there are spaces that people can't fit into. And they wanted to design a robot that is able to actually autonomously, that is without human control, figure out its way through the bridge and look at the state of the metal on the bridge and transmit it back to engineers who put it into a GIS system and decide what kinds of maintenance needs to be done. And what they used for inspiration, which is another really big area of robotics, is they used an inchworm and the way that an inchworm works. And this little robot, Croc, is able to get into all kinds of tiny spaces and autonomously map it out. And this is real. You know, this isn't science fiction. This is happening now, and these robots have been working on the bridge for several years already. So let's talk about robots and jobs for a moment. And when I talk about robots here, I'm talking about software robots too, not just hardware, you know, artificial intelligence. And when it comes time to look at automation and how it will impact a job, there are a number of things that people need to take into consideration before you start an automation project. One of them is, technically, can it be automated either now or in the near future with the technologies that we have? The next is cost. You know, if it's really expensive, it may not be worth doing. But you also have to look at the human side, and one of the things to look at is the cost of labor and also the scarcity of labor. If you have something that needs to be done and you don't have the skill sets and you can automate it, then it actually makes sense to do it. But it's not just about replacing people. There are a lot of automation tasks that are being undertaken right now where it's the enhanced productivity and additional data sets that you're getting through automation that make it worthwhile. A great example is in agriculture, where robots are being used to do all sorts of things in precision farming. And these robots are armed with sensors that are able to detect moisture levels in soil, chemicals, nutrients, weeds, all sorts of things that actually add value to what the robot is doing beyond what a human being can do. But there's also a couple of other things. There's regulation. So if I thought about driverless cars and it was suddenly decided that they would be outlawed in Australia or in a particular state, then we wouldn't see driverless cars in that particular area or any other particular type of automation. And then there's social acceptance. And for social acceptance, I like to turn to the world of science fiction. Is anybody else in this audience a science fiction geek besides me? Oh, a couple sort of half. How many of you have heard of Isaac Asimov? Yep. Well, he was one of my favorite authors growing up, and he writes about robots a lot. And of course, this is well before robots became a reality. And in a world that he described in the future Earth about 1,000 years from now, we have humanoid-type robots that aren't quite human-like. They're kind of actually a little bit stupid, but they take a lot of human jobs, and you find that there's real resistance in society to those robots, and people end up wanting to bash them and, you know, trip them up and do all sorts of things. But then you have another part of human civilization which has gone to outer space, and they've colonized other planets. And for that group of people, robots are their companions. They outnumber humans 10,000 to 1, and they're performing lots of useful tasks. And in fact, the robots out in space are a lot more advanced than the robots that were on Earth, so much so that one humanoid robot actually had a woman fall in love with him and marry him. So you get this all social acceptance from all spectrums, from robot bashing to potentially falling in love with a humanoid robot. Probably not going to happen tomorrow. One of the first places you're going to see robots is with driverless cars. And you may not realize that in today's models, and models for a number of years, you've had robots driving cars. How many of you have a car that does self-parking? Anybody? Yep, guess what? That's a robot driving your car. There are already features like adaptive cruise control that you can buy in today's models where, guess what? It's a robot that's actually controlling whether it's accelerating or stopping and keeping pace. It's feature creep. You're going to start seeing it come into cars that you buy, and you're not going to go in and say, hey, I want to buy a driverless car. You're actually going to get that as a feature, and it'll probably be called autopilot. But it goes beyond just that. One of the things that I saw at the Consumer Electronics Show in January was this. It's a vision van from Mercedes. And this particular vision van has a robotic cargo loader in the back and drones on the top. So the idea with this is that the vision van will go into a neighborhood, the driver will make a delivery, and the drones will be able to autonomously take packages and make deliveries at the same time, increasing productivity by 50%. Another concept that they have is, rather than drones, is to have little bots that are wheelie bots to also be able to deliver packages. And in that model, they're expecting an increase in productivity of about 120%, moving from about 180 packages a day to 400 packages for any given van. And the idea is that this van will be like a mothership parked in a neighborhood, and you'll have the person who's driving the van and the bots delivering packages. Autonomous trucks are already legal in Las Vegas and have been since 2015. So this is a picture of a real autonomous truck from Daimler. It's a division of Mercedes. And right now, you can drive it without a human actually controlling it on a highway in Nevada. And you still have to have a human in the cab, but that human can be answering emails or watching videos or doing something else. You know, you have to think, well, how long will they still want the human in the cab? Now, mind you, with truck driving, there are some dangerous situations where you do want a human, but if that human is engaged in writing an email, will they actually be able to react in time, even if they're sitting in the cab? You know, we've got to think about these things too. Another really cool transport project, which will be autonomous, is Hyperloop. Have any of you heard of a Hyperloop? Yeah. So what this is about, it's something that Elon Musk is working on, and this is a picture of a real test track out in Nevada. It's a big tube that is at near vacuum, and you're using magnetic levitation to hurl pods of people or cargo at very high speeds. So an average cruising speed for a Hyperloop would be 760 kilometers per hour. Top speed would be between 1,200 and 1,300 kilometers per hour. So far, testing is going well, and there's a pre-order in already from the UAE to put in a Hyperloop between Abu Dhabi and Dubai, taking an hour-and-a-half drive and cutting it down to 12 minutes. There are also talk in America, and I don't know whether this will go through or not, but there's talk of putting in a Hyperloop that will go between Washington, D.C. and New York City, coming through Baltimore and Philadelphia. I know that area really well. I grew up in Philly. You could spend about 5 hours or 6 hours doing that drive. This Hyperloop ostensibly will do it in 29 minutes. There's also talk about using Hyperloop as the next generation of high-speed rail here in Australia. And I don't know whether this will happen, but if it does, there is the potential to completely revolutionize and change what it means to live in regional Australia. Imagine being able to get from Newcastle to Sydney in 10 minutes, or from Sydney to Canberra in 17 minutes, or from Canberra to Albury Wodonga, and I think it's 19 minutes, or Sydney to Melbourne in 15 minutes. You could actually live in regional areas and have a 30-minute city where everything that you need is within a 30-minute commute. It could change the property market too. Imagine if we had a hyperloop where people could actually live in regional areas but still work in the major capital cities. There'd be a real change in property pricing and a lot of depressurization, if you like, in the property bubble that's happening in the capital cities around this country. Robots are coming, for sure. These pictures are all photos that I took at the Consumer Electronics Show in January. One of the trends that's really big with robots is making them cute and friendly and anime-like, you know? I mean, look at these faces, you know, they look like toys. In fact, some of them are. A couple that I'd like to point out to you are the robots that are on the right-hand side. Now, these are robots that are designed as personal assistants. They're armed with Amazon Alexa, and you actually are talking to these robots, and it's just like having, you know, a device in your house, but it's actually a mobile device that is, in effect, a digital avatar that you're talking to. One that I think is really important for the HR function to understand is this one up here in the middle, the Lubot. And this is just one example of a robot that I've seen that is designed for little kids. Lubot is designed for kids between the age of 2 and 12 years old. It's cute, it's roly-poly, it uses artificial intelligence, it's connected to the cloud, it uses natural voice recognition, and it's talking to your kids. Now, when I was talking to the exhibitor at CES, I asked whether they're recording the kids' conversations, and they said no. But you have to actually wonder, you know, with all these toys, what are they recording about, you know, kids? Or actually, what are they recording about your conversations with the robots, too? Kids are going to grow up with robots as part of their environment. They're going to grow up talking to machines. And if you've ever seen kids with iPhones or iPads, you'd think that they'd been born with glass in their hand. Well, the same thing's going to happen with bots. And already in industry, we're starting to see robots being used in a lot of different places. And I want to emphasize this to show you that this is not science fiction stuff. This is not future stuff. This is now. So if I go around clockwise, starting at the top here, this is a robot called Sam for semi-autonomous mason, and he's based in the US, and he's a bricklayer. When I first looked at Sam about 2 years ago, it was capable of laying about 1,000 bricks per day. A typical mason will lay between 300 and 400 bricks today, and a top mason may do between 700 and 900, and they're really cooking. Today, Sam is able to do 3,000 bricks per day. It still has humans loading it up. However, there's a robot here in Australia called Hadrian X that is completely autonomous, and Hadrian is able to lay 1,000 bricks per hour. In warehouses, there are lots of robots. The one I have pictured here is from Locus Robotics, but that's just one brand. In Amazon warehouses, according to stats I read a few months ago, they had already deployed 47,000 robots in their warehouse and growing. But they're hiring more people too, which is interesting. So it's not that robots are displacing people, they're displacing some of the manual, repeatable, predictable tasks that people do. There's a restaurant in China that has robots that greet you when you walk in. So you've got a robot concierge. You've got robots in the back that are doing the stir frying and making dumplings. And then you have robots that bring you out your meal on a tray. In San Jose, there's a hardware store called Orchard that has a robot called Oshbot. And you walk in and you actually can talk to Oshbot, tell it, I'm looking for this, you know, and it will show you on its faceplate where the widget happens to be and lead you there. And on its back, it's actually got digital advertising. And if it happened to use facial recognition, which it doesn't yet, it could actually look at what kinds of people are on back of it, rather than individual people, like the demographics of people, and display ads that are appropriate to whoever is on the other side of the robot. In the future, though, we may very well have humanoid robots, like the kinds that I was describing in science fiction. This is an experimental robot hand being designed by researchers at Yale in conjunction with people in universities all around the world. And the way that they've modeled this robot is they took a 3D scan of a human hand and they made a robot hand that was just like it, and it has the dexterity of a human hand. It's able to do things like grasp tape, grasp CDs, and right now, the musculature, if you like, on top of it is made with plastic and polymer materials. But what they want to do in the course of time is to be able to grow muscle and veins on top of it using bioprinting, perhaps, as well as growing skin. The idea is that they want this kind of robot hand to be a prosthetic of the future. Imagine if you've lost a limb and you've got a 3D scan of the limb that you've lost, and you have your skin grown right on top of it, and that's your replacement arm. How much would that change life? But that's just the beginning of what could be humanoid robots. So it's probably about 10 years out before we start to see a real prosthetic like this, and beyond that for humanoid robots. But they're on the roadmap. It's not something that is purely science fiction. Already, we have lots of drones that are being used in industry, and they all have cameras. And right now, a lot of them are still manually controlled by humans. But as we move further into the future, we're going to see a lot of autonomous drones as well. In other words, drones that are able to navigate without a human controlling them. And there are a couple that are really of interest here. I mean, there's insurance, drones that are being used in the insurance industry to look at flood and bushfire damage and be able to help people get repairs done right away. There's this ambulance drone here, which is totally cool, because what happens is if you've got a heart attack, a lot of times the ambulance won't get there fast enough. And this drone can fly at 100 kilometers an hour. It hones in on the GPS signal of the person who's called the emergency line, and it's got a flying defibrillator in it, and a person will talk you through how to put a defibrillator on a person. One of the coolest drones that I saw, though, is this one down here, and it's a flying taxi. It's the world's first flying taxi. It's from a company in China called Ehang. It's the Ehang 184, and I got to see it at CES, and it's a working prototype, and it is completely autonomous. You get in and literally you just use an app to tell the drone where you want it to go. It can take up to 220 pounds, so you've got to make sure you stay slim. And it can fly for 23 minutes, and it flies at about 100 kilometers per hour. In the future, not too distant future, mind you, we're going to be seeing drone highways in the sky. And what I'm talking about is segmenting our airspace in urban areas for drone usage. Already in the United States, NASA is starting to work on plans for highways in the sky in the US. And it started with an Amazon white paper, because Amazon's been making a lot of investment into robots and into drone delivery and robot delivery, anything to get packages to people faster. But the idea is that you'd have segmented spaces where higher levels, you'd have drones flying completely autonomously, and they'd be equipped with all kinds of sensors, and they'd be the really fast drones. At lower levels, you'd have drones that might be manually controlled, and they would be geo-fenced off. In other words, you'd have, if you like, electronic boundaries of where they're able to go. There will be so many jobs created out of this. There'll be vehicle-to-vehicle networks that will be controlling this traffic, and it's an opportunity for companies to get into. There'll be black boxes that need to be designed to be able to figure out what's happened when something goes wrong. There'll be people who are employed to design packaging that is fit for aerodynamic delivery by drones. You'll have people that are employed to be able to train drone operators or programmers if it's an autonomous drone. You'll have licensing. Again, tons and tons of jobs are going to come out of this, not least of which is a new segment for drones as a service, because a lot of companies are not going to want to learn how to control these machines themselves. They'd actually rather just outsource it as a service and get whatever job the drone is doing done. So let's talk about artificial intelligence for a moment. And when I use the term AI, I'm using it as an umbrella term for a lot of technologies: machine learning, cognitive intelligence, emotion detection, facial recognition, all sorts of things. In the early days of AI, which started, by the way, in 1956, so it sounds like a really new sci-fi technology, but it's been around a long time. What they tried to do was look at human experts and program in exactly the decision trees that humans made and put them into software. But that was very limited. Today, the way that you teach AIs is that you're actually building neural networks, and you're using techniques like deep learning, and you're throwing tons of information at them. So you're feeding them with databases. You're feeding them with structured and unstructured documents. You're feeding them with YouTube videos or corporate training videos. You're feeding them with social media feeds and all sorts of other information. And that is how you teach AIs to do different tasks today. It's not about specific programming, it's about training. Already, AI is being used in the workforce in a number of areas, and it's going to be disruptive of a lot of industries. So in the finance sector, we have robo-advisors that are starting to become available. How many of you have heard of those? Basically, software bots that consumers can use to make investments without having a human advisor. But there's nothing to say that a human advisor can't use those same bots that are consuming lots of data about market conditions and turn that into a tool that they use to provide financial advice. In the world of medicine, in oncology specifically, IBM Watson and Memorial Sloan Kettering have been working with oncologists using AI as an assistive technology. So in this application, the AI is pouring through tons of research reports that come out every single week in the world of oncology, looking at conference proceedings, looking at new drug trials, and then matching them up with patient histories, which are often very, very complex, and suggesting things to a human oncologist, a specialist, about potential new ways of treating people with cancer. And the rate of matching between what IBM Watson is coming up with and what oncologists are coming up with is getting higher and higher all the time. And it's probably a matter of time, maybe in a couple of years, before you start getting the AI that's able to detect things because of the massive data that it's actually swallowing and learning from that humans are not able to detect. There's a law firm in the US that has a robot AI called Ross, and it's a bankruptcy law firm, and they're using Ross to pour through the thousands of documents that are involved in cases of bankruptcy and distill down the conclusions about what might have caused a particular company to go south. It's predicted by Deloitte that up to 39% of the jobs in the legal sector could be impacted by automation. There's even a lingerie company that's using an AI for its digital marketing. And they were getting kind of pissed off, if you like, at their digital ad agency, and they decided to try an AI called Arthur. and the company is Casabella. And what Arthur, the AI, discovered was that lingerie ads that had pictures of people actually outperformed ads that didn't. And they grew their customer base by 30% by using an AI. So AIs are already being used across a range of industries. In the finance sector, Bank, which is a subsidiary of NAB, released a chatbot a few months back ago in the home loan area. And what they've done with this chatbot, which is really an AI, and they taught it by looking at real chat conversations that people had with Eubank on their website. And that's how they taught this particular AI to be able to answer people text-based with all kinds of information about home loans. They're now looking at adding a voice interface to this as well, and adding in emotion detection from the cadence in the words that are being spoken or the language that's being used, so that if someone is getting flustered or upset, a human can intervene straight away. And just recently, NAB, the parent company, has released another chatbot that is aimed at the business banking sector. And that chatbot is able to answer a whole range of questions around credit and debit cards right now. And I'd imagine that they'll continue growing this particular aspect of their business. AI is also being used in the financial industry to detect fraud. So there's an AI that came out of Cambridge University. It's a spin-out called Futurist, and it started with mathematicians who were able to detect anomalies in video games. So they were able to see with games like Counter-Strike that people seemed to be able to shoot through walls or know in advance that things were happening, like how can somebody react that fast? So they developed software, artificial intelligence, that's able to detect anomalies. And they've now applied that to the finance and insurance space. So when I'm on Westpac's site doing my banking, I have particular ways that I navigate through your website. What this particular AI, Eric, is able to do is he can detect if I'm interacting with your website in a way that is outside the norm and raise a red flag and stop fraud in real time. But AIs are not perfect, and I'll talk in a couple of examples of where things can go wrong with AI. It's actually very easy to trick an AI to think that one image is something completely different. And it's not necessarily a flaw with AI. It has to do with the mathematics behind deep learning and image recognition. And what you do is you only need to change less than 1% of pixels in an image to make an AI think that something that is a pyramid is suddenly an ostrich. So if you, as a human, look at the picture, it'll still look like your little doggy or a pyramid or a school bus, but the AI, because you've jiggled these pixels, can be tricked into making that image something else. It's using what they call classifiers and weighting, and it's a hack that people could do. So as you're starting to look at image recognition with AI, it's really important that you understand that it's not infallible. And I get into these conversations with people about lethal autonomous weapons. And this debate is, hey, you really don't want an automated AI looking at a, quote, picture and deciding it's a missile when it may actually be a commercial airliner. There's some real need for human discretion at this stage in the development of AI. Maybe in 20 years, we'll get around these problems, but there are still some flaws that are in there now. So speaking of AI, one of the first places that you're likely to encounter AI in your daily life will be on your smartphone. When you talk to Siri or Cortana or Google. But you're also going to be seeing a whole lot of appliances like these, which is Amazon Alexa, Echo, or Google Home Assistant. Anybody have a home digital assistant? Oh, yes. Do you like it? Yeah. It's pretty convenient, right? But it's always listening. And, to me, I worry about the always listening side of things, especially if I think about a business context. I'm also starting to get a little bit creeped out with some of the things that are happening with these devices. So I just upgraded my Skype app on my phone, and this is actually a screenshot on my phone. And I found that Microsoft, if I wanted to have my contacts in my Skype app, which I used to have before I upgraded to the latest version, I now have to basically tick this terms and conditions that allows Microsoft to have access to my whole contact database anytime they want, multiple times a day. I don't want Microsoft to have my contact database. There's no reason. They don't need it for the app to work. It's on my phone. It doesn't need to go up to the cloud. I really worry about some of the privacy things. Amazon has come out with a new device, which is really cool. It's a newer version of Echo. It's called Echo Show. It's this other device here. And it's got always on camera. And that's cool. You can do video conferencing. But if you sync it with your contact book, and let's say you've got thousands of contacts that you've met over the course of multiple decades, and they also have one of these, it'll show you in that little green dot up here who's active and who's talking to their Echo. Now, again, there's a bit of a privacy issue here. Do you really want somebody that you've met 20 years ago once in a business meeting to know that you're up and active, with your Amazon Echo? And there's also, in this particular device, a way to set it so that you have an always-on drop-in connection is what they call it. So let's say you've got an elderly parent and they've given you permission to drop in. Well, then you can turn on their camera and look at what's happening in their house without them actually acknowledging and saying, yes, I'll accept that phone call or connection. So technology is great and it can be really convenient, but we start to border on this edge of how much information do we want to share about our private lives, and what happens when all of this goes into the corporate environment as well. In about 3 years' time, in 2020, I think that it's going to be very, very common for people to have digital personal assistants, and they'll probably be based on their smartphone. There might be gadgets like, a Google Echo or, not a Google Echo, an Amazon Echo or a Google Home Assist, but they'll likely be smartphones, and they'll likely be from social media giants that are making this software, which is really useful, available for free. But you've got to think about it from a work environment. What happens when your staff are coming in with always-on phones and recording everything that happens in a business meeting? What are the implications for companies when people have these really cool and useful digital assistants? One of the things that I think we'll see as a new job of the future will be a digital avatar personality designer, because let's face it, if you're going to be interacting with either a robot or a phone-based AI all the time, you actually want something that's got a little bit of personality and is really attuned to your needs. And I think that there'll be a whole range of jobs for people who might be actors or voiceover actors today, and people just with larger than life personalities, to start to actually be the inputs into the avatars of tomorrow. And there'll probably be a combination of creative people teaming with technical people who make this a reality. You might have both skills in one person, but maybe not. Another job of the future that I think is going to be very important, especially in the corporate space, will be an executive level role that is in charge of the orchestration of people and automation. And here I'm talking about having someone who's able to take the big picture view of where do we use people, where do we use artificial intelligence, where do we use robots, and how do we orchestrate that in a precision-like manner that actually makes our operations more efficient. And along with that will be a role that I see as like a chief transformation officer, and it may be one and the same person. Because as you're getting more and more real-time information into your company from artificial intelligences, from sensors, from cloud-based data, you want to be able to take action immediately when circumstances affecting your business are known. And this role will be involved in helping to take that data and turning it into action quickly in an orchestrated precision manner. And one of the models that I think of when I'm describing this particular job of the future is the way that we've already deployed robots in factories. And there's a fairly clear delineation of labor between what the robots do in factories and what the people do in factories. Now, mind you, over the course of time that will change, but I can see something similar happening in the wider workforce. Another job of the future will be a robot teacher. And I'm not talking about these robots teaching you or your kids. You know, frankly, I don't think I'd want this automated mech to be teaching my kid. Can you imagine? Hey kid, wrong answer, kaboom, you know? That'll make you pay attention, wouldn't it? No, I'm actually talking about people who will be training robots to do many different tasks. So just like artificial intelligences, the robots, which also use AI, need to be taught how to do specific things. And there will be so many jobs involved in teaching robots to do particular tasks for particular companies and reprogramming them to do new tasks and continue evolving. One of the things that I think will evolve here as well is a new class of service that I'd call robots as a service. So here I'm thinking about robots in agriculture, for example. If you can imagine, a farmer might have need of a range of different robots, but he or she may not want to learn how to program those robots and maintain those robots and do everything involved with collecting data from them. So I think that this is going to be an absolutely huge growth area for people with technical skills. However, there are also things that we need to think about that are not technical. And here I'm talking about the human side of things, compassion and empathy, and actually interacting with people in a human-like manner. And I think that another big category of the future is going to be an empathy trainer. And for this job role, it's not just robots, it's AIs. And it's actually teaching the machines and the software to interact with humans in a more human-like way, to be able to pick up on the nuances of people's emotions and react accordingly. It's so easy for AIs to go wrong. How many of you heard the story about Microsoft Tay, which was a chatbot? Okay, so it was released on Twitter for exactly one day, and Tay, the chatbot, went from "I love humans" to "Hitler was right" in the space of 24 hours, and along the way had all kinds of other, racially offensive tweets, and they had to take it offline. It's just so important that as we're deploying this kind of software and these machines in our environment, that they interact with us like a person would, more and more. And interestingly, there's a startup in the US that is already employing what they're calling empathy trainers to help train some of the digital assistants like Cortana and Siri and Amazon Alexa to start behaving in a more human-like manner. And the people that will be hired for these kinds of jobs may be philosophers, poets, and others with liberal arts backgrounds rather than the techie backgrounds. Another major job category of the future will be people who repair robots. And they're going to be robots in many different shapes and sizes. And if you can imagine in your house today, if something goes wrong with your TV, you call a TV repair person. Something goes wrong with your dishwasher, you call a different dishwasher repair person. Something goes wrong with your washing machine, you've got somebody else that you call. You will have the same sort of things with robots that are designed for many different industries. And this will be a new vocational skill that will be one that is growing in the number of people employed in this task. So you would need to be digitally literate, but you wouldn't necessarily be the person that designs the robot just to be able to repair the robot. One of the technologies that will be used to help people in this task is augmented reality. And I'm picturing an example up here where we have this young lady who's doing repair of an agricultural robot, and she's got augmented reality glasses on, and in front of her she can see an avatar of a person that is showing her exactly what needs to be fixed in particular machines. So we're going to see the use of technologies like augmented reality and virtual reality for training be very important in terms of underlying skill sets that help people to accomplish these jobs. Another job that I think is going to be very important will be a chief ethics officer. And when it comes to automation, there are so many areas where ethics will play a very important role. First will be in an area of what gets automated. And I think companies and any organization that is looking at automation needs to work with its people and not just make a decision from on above. But moreover, there are some other interesting things that happen with AI that are a bit of a black box mystery right now, even to AI researchers. So here's one example. In the US, an AI has been deployed to look at the criminal justice system, and when people are up for parole, they're looking at the potential of recidivism. In other words, will a person be likely to recommit a crime based on their history? And there are 137 inputs that go into this decision-making process, none of which have to do with race or ethnic background. Yet the AI has been consistently more lenient to white parolees. And it's a bit of a mystery because, this wasn't programmed in. And part of the reason is that this gets so complex is that the bigger the neural network gets, the more opaque it is even to the AI researchers. They don't understand exactly how it's getting from inputs ABC to outputs XYZ. I have a theory about this particular one, and that is that along the way, as people are making their journey through the criminal justice system, there are all kinds of reports that are written about their behavior. And I think that there are probably unconscious human biases that are in these written reports that the AI is chewing up. And the AI is picking up on these subtle emotional currents, and that's why it's making its wrong decision. So what I see this particular job role doing is actually being very fundamental in checking that the outputs that come from an artificial intelligence are congruent with what you would expect the outputs to be. And it's going to be an ongoing challenge. So whether we're talking about criminal justice system or an output for your decision, for your business, it doesn't really matter. You still want the right output. You don't want to say, oh, it's just a magic AI and the AI is always right. And some of the decisions will be really ethical. I mean, if you think about driverless cars, for example, how do you decide if an accident is unavoidable, whether the people in the car get injured or whether the pedestrian gets injured? Does the decision change if it's a different car manufacturer, or a different model car, or a different version of software? Does the decision change if it's a mom with a pram who's walking in front of the car, or whether it's a kid that's texting and not paying attention? Who's going to make these decisions? Somebody's got to train the AI to make decisions that are really, really hard, and how do we make that decision? So there's a lot that I think can fall into this particular category. Another major job category of the future that I think even today is going to be really important is what I'm calling a privacy guardian. And you can call it a privacy manager, but you can think about it on both an individual basis and a company basis. From an individual perspective, when we have all of these gadgets that are always on and always listening, we really do have to think about who's recording what and what are the implications, on my personal life of having all of this information stored perhaps in the cloud. But on a corporate basis, increasingly companies are trying to collect as much information about their clients as they possibly can because you're using it to be able to make decisions about your business. But what happens if there's a data breach, either a hack or an unintentional mistake, and they happen all the time? There are data breach laws that are coming into effect in February next year in Australia that will have very severe consequences for companies where a breach is made. So I believe that companies will need to look very seriously at what data is stored. Does it really, really need to be stored? How is it secured? Is the information just in one big honeypot that a single hack or a single breach could make it really easy for identity theft to be perpetrated on your clients? Or is it stored in lots of disparate different places where someone who actually wanted to do something nefarious would have to do a lot of work of data assembly to be able to use data that might accidentally leak? And I think this is a role that's going to be very important in the finance industry, especially because of the sensitive data that you're holding about clients. Another job of the future that I see will be really big is a blockchain application designer. So how many of you have heard of cryptocurrency? All of you, yeah. We're at Westpac, right? Is Westpac doing anything with cryptocurrency right now? No, not blockchain? Just doing some experiments. Right. Well, blockchain, which is the underlying mathematics behind cryptocurrency, can be used for a lot of different applications, whether it is a currency like Bitcoin, or trading stocks, or actually trading contracts for property values, or trading contracts or provenance for artwork or diamonds. Lots of different things have the potential to be a blockchain application. And I was reading just recently that it was about 2 weeks ago, I guess, in the Fin Review, the chair of ASIC was talking about cryptocurrency and the fact that he thought that the central banks in a 5 to 10 year time frame may actually be offering cryptocurrency transactions directly to consumers, cutting out banks completely. The world of cryptocurrency and blockchain is one that will have a lot of disruption to a lot of industries, but also a lot of jobs that come out of it as well. 3D printing is another area that's going to create a huge number of jobs. And when you think of 3D printing, you may think of plasticky stuff, but it goes so far beyond that. The dress that you see here, this was 3D printed, and it contains not only thread, but it has electronics meshed in. The photo I took at Drexel Lab, and it's actually designed for pregnant women, and in this dress it's got a neonatal monitor that is comfortable for the baby and for the mother. Imagine if you love clothes like I do, and I know Shanaz does, that you've got a body scan and you can literally pick any outfit that you want, and it gets 3D printed to fit you absolutely perfectly in the colors and materials and style that you want. I would love to have something like that. That's on the horizon. There'll be people that actually design these kinds of things. I actually started thinking of body scans probably 15 years ago, and the technology just wasn't there yet. This food here, this is actually 3D printed with real food. There's a company called Natural Machines that has a product called Foodini that has canisters where you load in real food, so like the mix for pasta, you mix it up and you put it in, then you have another canister for cheese and another canister for sauce, and it 3D prints all these gorgeous things faster than you could do it yourself. And it can do everything from cookies to pastas to hamburgers to you name it. And it's real food. There will be people who literally are 3D printing chefs that will be designing recipes for 3D printers. There's a company in China that is doing 3D printing of entire homes and villas. This was 3D printed. And 3D printer is about 120 feet long, 40 feet wide, 20 feet high. It uses construction refuse as its fuel, and along with some additives for glue, it's able to print entire homes and villas. And they've already exported the technology to the Middle East, where they did the printing in China, but they did an office block, and it's installed in Dubai. There are 3D printers already that are bioprinters. In other words, they're using living cells and printing things like skin and veins and ears and noses. This is one example, BioBots. And the founder, believe it or not, he's probably 25 now, but he invented this when he was at university. So his background was that he was a biology student at the University of Pennsylvania, but he had always been a little bit geeky in programming, and he was looking at biology and how they culture cells, and he thought, God, this is absolutely old-fashioned. We can actually better this with taking technology. And it's not the only company doing it, but these are already in research labs around the world that are being used to culture tissues of all different types for drug testing. And this is just one company that's doing it. I was just reading the other day that there's a research group that is looking to be able to 3D print a replacement cornea for people with glaucoma or other eye diseases in about 5 years' time. They think that it will be in the market. So this whole world of 3D printing is absolutely exploding, and the number of jobs that will come in this area are amazing. Everything from people who design the ink for whatever kind of printer it is, to designing the end objects, to imagining what else might be 3D printed. Another major job category that I see is a career transitionist. And as we start moving into the world of the future with automation, people will need to have pathways to get from where they're at today, and especially if they're in a job that may have aspects of it or all of it automated, into something that's really cool and fun to do in the future. So I can see this kind of role being, if you like, a human resource role on steroids. So today you would do things like skills and personality assessments and other things to determine a person's capabilities. But if you take that and you mesh it with jobs of the future and descriptions of what these future jobs might be, and a person's innate talents and likes and desires, you can actually start to help them move from where they're at now to where they need to be going forward. And it's not a one-shot deal. This is going to keep changing over the course of time. So I can see a person in this position doing one-to-one training or group mentoring, doing it online, through video conferencing. I can see AI being used in this role to help customize curricula to train people in new career paths, because AI is great at being able to take data and match it with other data. So if a person learns visually rather than by reading, why not repurpose the same content in a way that a person is going to take up and use naturally? It's a great way of actually using these technologies to help people make this transition. I also see another role, and that is a personal health coach or data interpreter. So how many of you have wearables? Anybody? Yep. And how many of you might do things like track calories or have other apps, you know? Yeah, I do it too, right? You know, looking at nutrition or health or fitness or all kinds of goals. But you know, you've got all these devices and you've got these apps, but how do you actually make sense of everything that it's telling you? And how do you actually put it together? And especially if you have a medical condition. So I think that we will start to see whole ranges of people that are in this area of helping you to take the data that you're collecting about yourself, your own biosensing, and turn it into something that's actionable for your own health and well-being. We're going to see so many freelancers. You know, this whole idea of a job for life, I think, is really gone out the window. And already we have freelance platforms, but I think we're going to see a lot more professional freelancers as well. We're going to see a lot of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship in the future. And I think one of the things that we need to train people for is how do you actually run a business? And what are the sorts of things that go into it aside from just having a really cool idea? You know, what is it actually like to run and grow a business and maybe sell it and, you know, do a stock market listing and so on? But importantly, the human touch. You know, we talk a lot about technology, but I just don't see that humans are going to be out of the loop, especially when it comes to things like personal care. With an older aging population, we're going to see a lot of jobs that involve interaction with people, and especially to help eliminate social isolation. So as we go into the future, how are people going to change? Are we going to take technology into our own bodies? I think the answer is yes. And it's going to start with this. It's going to start with smart contacts. This is still research lab stuff. And smart contacts combine technologies like augmented reality, cameras and video technology, ICT, and biotech into a single device. The images that I'm showing here are from Google. The big picture is from 2014. The small picture is from 2016. You can see that there are a lot less opaque bits. By the time this comes to market in about 5 years or so, all of the opaque bits are going to be translucent. These will probably be made out of a material called graphene. Graphene is an amazing material. It is harder than diamond, 300 times harder than steel, but one of the most bendable, flexible materials that we know. You know, so as well as being strong, it's bendable, flexible, and a good conductor of electricity. Already in the smart contact world, Google, Sony, and Samsung have patents that allow you to blink and take a picture or start a video. So imagine that if I were standing on stage wearing these smart contacts, I would know all of your names, your backgrounds, your details. I'd be hooking into social media. If I were driving a car, I'd have navigation in front of me. The biotech side is where it gets really cool. So I need reading glasses, and I'm constantly popping them on and off, and it's just usually annoying and frustrating. Well, there are pharma companies that are designing smart contacts that do auto-focusing. So imagine being able to autofocus, and not only that, but get telephoto vision as well. Not only that, there are companies that are looking at detecting your insulin levels directly from a chemical called lacryglobin, which is in your tear ducts. There are also companies that are looking at sensing drug levels of different types and doing drug delivery directly through the contacts. In about 7 years' time, it's very likely that we will have app stores, just like we do for our smartphones, but for our smart contacts, that combine things like biotech and ICT. And we'll see a lot of freelancers design these, just like they do in the app stores today. Personally, I can't wait to get one of these. Now, when it comes to human implants, I'm not quite as keen on human implants just yet. I've actually got friends that have implanted chips right here in the metacarpal area, and they're doing things like being able to open doors, you know, and unlock stuff in their house. I think that's actually a bit silly right now, because whatever you implant now is going to be obsolete in 6 months. In 2 years, it's going to be totally out of date, and you need surgery to get it out. But that's going to change in the future. there are materials, again, graphene. Graphene is this amazing material. The graphene flagship in Europe released a report late last year that showed a study of connecting graphene directly to the neurons in a brain, not a live brain, but connecting to neurons. And there was no scar reaction, no glial scar tissue caused over an extended period. So this might be a material that we use eventually for brain-machine interfaces. Imagine that. Well, companies are already not only imagining it, but working on it. In the US, DARPA has this idea that it wants to have implantables in soldiers that are able to regulate their nervous system and modulate their mood for things like post-traumatic stress disorder. They have already issued 7 contracts to research companies to try to make it so. I'm going to show you this little video from UC Berkeley, and this is a prototype of something they're calling neural dust, which is a result of one of these DARPA contracts. So right now, they've got a chip that is millimeter size, so it's small, but it's not tiny. It'll be nanometer by the time something like this actually gets implanted. But what they're using to be able to transmit signals back and forth is ultrasound rather than radio frequency. Because I have to admit, I worry about all these RF devices and the impact on our body, whereas ultrasound I think is a lot less damaging or potentially damaging to organs. And as you'll see in this video, one of the things that they're already able to do is pick up electrical activity from the nerve fibers of a rat. They haven't done it in people yet. And the idea is that you might have these little bots floating around in your body that are actually monitoring your organs in real time. And you might have other nanobots in your body that are fixing things that go wrong in real time. There are so many potential applications for brain-machine interfaces that it's really quite extraordinary. And as you can imagine, the military would be quite interested in this for lots of applications. But think about it for a moment. Imagine that your employer has stuck a chip in your body and can control your nervous system. Would you really want your employer to have that kind of power? Or what if it got hacked into? Or, what if you're a soldier and, they want you to fire on a civilian population and you're saying morally, no, no, no. And instead of sending you, signals that alleviate pain, suddenly you're getting pain. There could be some really serious ramifications to these kinds of technologies that we're starting to play with now. Another interesting technology, again, going to this whole brain-machine interface. This comes from Elon Musk, and he's founded a company called Neuralink, and they're looking to design what they're calling neural lace to be able to interface directly between our neocortex and the web. So it's still just in the idea phase, but there are other researchers at Harvard that have designed this polymer mesh that they've been able to inject into a mouse's skull to be able to pick up the signals that this mouse is thinking and record them. So this is another area, again, it's like something straight out of science fiction. I don't think we're going to see this one for a while, but Elon Musk has been hiring all kinds of neuro researchers. What we might see in the 2030s are 3D printed DNA bots that are actually injected into our body and connect our neocortex directly to the web. So if you can imagine, if it's 3D printed with your own DNA, it's biocompatible, so you're not worried about electronics stuck in your brain. Imagine thinking a question and getting the answer automatically, or you need a new skill and you download it directly from the web or you stream it. Or you want to send an email and you just think it, and oops, hope you don't do it too fast. But the medical side of it could be pretty extraordinary too. Imagine that these little bots are in your body correcting things in real time. Stem cells are another fascinating med tech area. And in this particular picture, I'm showing a neurosurgeon, Dr. Christopher Duma, who's been working with Alzheimer's patients. And in this particular case, One of his patients, his first one, is a guy by the name of Jack Sage, who's 82 years old. And with Alzheimer's, your memory typically goes downhill really fast. And what they've done is they've drilled a hole directly into Jack's brain, and they're doing stem cell injections directly into his brain. Highly experimental. They've done 8 so far, but his memory is coming back. And, not totally, he's not cured, but his hippocampus is actually measurably larger than it was before they started this. There are now 19 patients in the trial. Stem cells are an area of regenerative medicine that could make a big difference to all of our lives. Genetic engineering is even more astounding, and I'm going to close with this one because this is just out of this world. There are researchers at Salk Institute who have been working with genes in vitro, so in a petri dish, with mice and people, and they've been able to reverse aging. And in one live mouse with a disease called progeria, which is a rapid aging disease, they've actually turned back the clock on this mouse with progeria, and they've helped another middle-aged mouse with another medical condition. There are researchers who believe that aging is actually a genetic switch that we will be able to turn off within the next 10 to 20 years, and that our lifespans will be expanded by 5 or 10 times what they are right now. In fact, one researcher believes that the first person to live to be 400 years old is being born this year. Imagine that you live forever. Or even imagine that you live to 400 or 800 years old. Do you want to work for 400 years? Just think about what would happen with our society, if we suddenly end up with really healthy, young-looking, but really old people, and population growth and automation. Look, just to sum up with a couple of ideas for where automation and jobs of the future is going. I absolutely think it's fundamental that people understand what is happening in the world of automation and not stick their head in the sand, because I hope I've demonstrated to you that automation is real and it's happening now. But when it comes to automating in a company, I think it's so important that we include people in this whole decision factor about what gets automated and what doesn't. And in a lot of jobs, even in my job, there are things that are really boring administrative stuff like paperwork that I would dearly love to automate and get rid of so that I can spend my time doing more constructive things. If you work with your people and you talk to people about the aspects of their jobs that could be automated, then that's where you start to laser focus so that you're bringing in efficiencies and getting rid of the pain points and the stuff that people really don't like to do. So then automation is actually augmenting your workforce, not replacing your workforce. I think if we start laying off people because a job is automated, that is absolutely the wrong thing. Then we end up with that dystopian view of society where we get 40 to 50% of people in our world not employed. That's not good for anyone. I mean, who would be your customers, right? That's a horrible outcome. Instead, if we start to look at the innate capabilities of people and do that personality and skills assessment and talent assessment that I spoke of earlier and matrix it to some of these new jobs of the future, many of which are predictable if you look at where the technology is going, you can actually start this whole cycle of reskilling and retraining before things get out of hand. And I think we've got about 3 to 4 years to really get on the front foot in terms of automation and make sure that we actually have an employed, happy workforce and that our companies continue to be vital. I think the corporate sector has a really big role to play here. Government may come out with policies, but I think it's the corporate leadership that will make a difference. Thank you so very much for your time.